Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be diving into a controversy that really shook up the Indian internet a little while back. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you know the one with Samay Raina and Ranbir Allahbadia?
Oh, yeah, the chess comment that kind of blew up. It felt like everyone and their mother had something to say about that.
For sure. And I have to admit, I was totally glued to my feed watching it all go down.
Yeah.
But beyond the headlines and all the hot takes, you know, I'm really curious to kind of dig into the bigger picture here, to remind folks, Samay is that stand-up comedian who's also like a chess master, right?
All right. And Ron Beer, of course, the fitness and self-help guru behind that huge beer biceps channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got these two massive online personalities, both of these huge dedicated audiences,
Mhm.
which I think is part of what makes this whole thing so fascinating, when these kind of controversies happen. It's not just about the individuals involved. It says something about like the whole dynamic of influence and
Yeah,
responsibility
for sure.
and how we engage in these online spaces. So let's rewind for a second, just break down what actually happened. So Ranbir made some comments about chess on his podcast, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it was Samay's reaction that kind of set everything off. He went on Twitter and publicly called Ron Beer out for spreading what he saw as misinformation about chess.
Interesting. So what was at the heart of Samay's argument? What was he saying about public figures and their responsibility?
Basically, his main point was that when you have a platform as big as Renbeer's, you have an obligation to be accurate, especially when you're talking about something specialized. Like, you shouldn't be speaking on things you're not an expert in. And of course, this being chess, a game, Samai is obviously super passionate about it. It definitely hit a nerve.
Yeah, I can see how that would spark a strong reaction.
Yeah.
So how did Ranbir handle the situation? Did he just like ignore it or?
Actually, he responded pretty quickly. And to his credit, he didn't shy away from it at all. He admitted that he wasn't a chess expert and that his comments were more like personal opinions than, coming from some deep knowledge of the game.
Yeah.
He even apologized for causing any offense.
Oh, interesting. So he owned up to not being an expert, but he also kind of defended his right to have an opinion. So I'm guessing that didn't exactly end the debate.
Uh-huh. No, not quite. This is the internet, after all. Things rarely just die down quietly.
So what happened next was this whole wave of discussion on social media. People started choosing sides, and things got pretty heated.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting for me because I feel like this whole controversy was about more than just chess. It kind of tapped into this much bigger conversation, right? So what about the people who sided with Samay? What were their main arguments? A lot of people agreed with Samay's point about the importance of accuracy, especially online where misinformation can spread so quickly. They felt like public figures, given their reach and influence, they have this special responsibility to make sure they're sharing accurate information, especially on complex topics. It was about accountability.
So it's about the potential consequences of getting things wrong when you have such a massive audience hanging on your every word.
Exactly. The concern is that inaccurate information, even if it's shared unintentionally, can have this ripple effect, leading people astray or reinforcing harmful ideas. And with someone like Ranbir, who's seen as a thought leader by so many people, those concerns are amplified.
That makes sense. But there was another side to this whole debate, right? There were also people defending Ranbir.
Oh, absolutely. And their perspective is just as important to consider. Their argument was that it's just not realistic to expect everyone to be an expert on everything. They said that demanding perfection from public figures could stifle open discussion and discourage people from sharing their thoughts and opinions.
So it's about finding a balance between holding people accountable and allowing for some degree of human fallibility.
Exactly. And I think that's a key tension point here. We're trying to navigate this online world where anyone can have a voice and information spreads so rapidly. Where do we draw the line? How do we balance the need for accuracy with the value of diverse perspectives, even if those perspectives aren't always perfectly informed?
Whoa, that's a tough one. It's like this whole controversy forced us to confront some really fundamental questions about how we consume and share information online. There's so much to unpack here.
Definitely. Yeah, it really does highlight the need to think about things, from different angles because we can't just shut down all conversations, because we're afraid of getting something wrong. But at the same time, we can't just let misinformation run wild either.
Right. So it's about finding that balance,
Right.
And maybe it's also about shifting the focus away from like blaming each other to like a more constructive approach to, online discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because one of the things that really stood out to me in this whole controversy was how quickly it became this like us versus them thing.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
People were digging their heels and defending their side. No room for, like, any middle ground.
Exactly. And that kind of polarization makes it almost impossible to have any kind of productive conversation. It just shuts down any chance of learning or changing your mind or, acknowledging that other perspectives might be valid.
So how do we move past that?
Hmm.
How do we create a more constructive approach? Like, I think we can all agree that yelling at each other on Twitter isn't exactly a recipe for progress.
Uh-huh, I agree. And I don't think there's one easy answer, like a magic formula, but I think one thing that can help is if we focus on what we all have in common. Because in this case, whether you're on Samay's side or Ranbir's side, I think most people would agree that we want to create an online space where, information is accurate and diverse perspectives are valued.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we can at least agree on the goal, then maybe that can help us have better conversations about how to actually get there. But that brings up another question for me. We've been talking about responsibility and the need for accuracy. But who gets to decide what's accurate, especially when you're dealing with something as subjective as like chess strategy?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what makes navigating these online spaces so tricky, because it's not always so black and white. There are often multiple valid perspectives, even within like a specialized field like chess. And what might be considered accurate can even change over time as new information emerges or our understanding evolves.
So it's not just about like fact-checking everything. There's more nuance to it than that.
Exactly. And that's where I think this idea of media literacy comes in.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does it mean to be media literate in the context of this controversy?
It means being able to look at information you see online with a critical eye. Not just taking something as truth because it's presented confidently or comes from someone you respect. It's about asking questions, considering different sources, and being aware of potential biases.
So in this specific case, it would mean looking at both Samay and Ranbir's statements not as like absolute truths, but as different pieces of the puzzle, each one representing a particular point of view.
Exactly. And it also means looking beyond that initial back and forth and considering the bigger context. What are the underlying assumptions? What are the motivations? What other voices or perspectives might be missing from the conversation?
Whoa, that's a lot to keep in mind. It's like being a detective, piecing together all the clues and coming to your own conclusions.
In a way it is. And it's not always easy, especially with how much information is constantly coming at us online. But I think it's a skill that's becoming more and more important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if we're not careful, we can get swept up in the loudest voices or the most attention-grabbing headlines.
Yeah.
And that's not how we build a healthy, informed online community.
Exactly. It's about cultivating this mindset of curiosity and skepticism and a willingness to engage with complex issues because, like they say, the truth is often somewhere in the gray areas.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect reminder as we continue to navigate this ever-evolving digital world. It's easy to get caught up in all the like back and forth, all the arguments and the debates about who's right. But sometimes I think we forget that there are like real people at the center of all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Especially online, it's so easy to forget that the people you're disagreeing with are, actual human beings. We
Right.
reduce them to like their arguments, their tweets, and we forget that they have whole lives and experiences outside of the screen.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see how both Samay and Ranbir were being portrayed online.
Right.
Some people were making them out to be heroes or villains,
Yeah.
Depending on whose side they were on.
Right. That's the whole problem with these echo chambers. We surround ourselves with people who already agree with us, and then it becomes so easy to like demonize anyone who thinks differently.
Totally. And it's something I'm really trying to be more aware of in my own online life. Because even though this particular controversy was about chess, it felt like it brought up this much bigger issue, this tendency to just jump to conclusions about people's intentions based on like a single comment or a tweet.
It's like we've lost the ability to give each other the benefit of the doubt, to assume that people are coming from a good place even when we disagree with them.
Which is kind of ironic, right? Because the internet was supposed to like bring us closer together, help us understand each other better. But sometimes it feels like it's doing the opposite.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is that online communication is just so much less nuanced than face-to-face.
Yeah.
You can't see someone's facial expressions. You can't hear their tone of voice. All those subtle things that help us understand what someone really means and, build empathy.
It's like we're all just stumbling around in the dark, bumping into each other, misinterpreting each other's intentions.
I love that analogy. It's so true. And it makes me think about how important it is to be really intentional about the language we use online, to choose our words carefully, to avoid making assumptions, and to, just be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
Yeah, because once something's out there on the internet,
Yeah.
it's out there.
Yeah.
You can't really take it back. And those words can have a real impact whether you mean them to or not. So I guess the question is, how do we move forward? How do we create a more, empathetic and understanding online environment?
It's a work in progress for sure, but I think it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own actions and, the way we interact with others, being willing to listen, to learn, and to engage in conversations where we're genuinely trying to understand each other instead of just trying to win an argument.
Yeah. Such a good point. And I think that applies so much more than just this one controversy.
Yeah.
It applies to everything we do online. Whether we're talking about chess or politics or whatever the latest meme is, let's all try to approach each other with a little more empathy and a little less judgment.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, folks, there you have it. Our deep dive into the Samay Raina and Ranbir Allahbadia controversy. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the complexities of influence and misinformation and how we talk to each other online.
Definitely. But if there's one thing I hope you take away from this conversation, it's the importance of thinking critically, being media literate, and above all, being empathetic.
Because at the end of the day, we have to remember that behind every screen name, behind every tweet, behind every comment, there's a real human being with thoughts and feelings and experiences just like us.
Absolutely. And if we can keep that in mind, maybe, just maybe, we can start to create a kinder, more understanding world online.
I love that. So until next time, keep those deep dives going, everyone.